Hey, it's Laura Ramsey with the Oracle Developer Community here at Oracle Open World 2017. I'm here with good friend Gerald Venzl. Gerald, how are you doing?
Very good, thanks. How are you, Laura?
Good. It was a big week for you.
Oh yes, a lot of exciting announcements that happened at Open World this year. We're
Tell
really,
me,
really excited.
Start at the top. Let's start with Sunday night, shall we? Yes, I think we should.
Okay, well, if people out there haven't heard yet, we announced the world's first autonomous database.
Autonomous database.
Yep.
That is so cool.
That is really, really awesome. So really a gigantic leap forward to everybody else when it comes to data management. So we're really proud of the team and everybody.
Why is it a leap forward when it comes to data management?
Because think about it as you think towards the cloud. Why was cloud so successful? Because things have been offered as a service, right? People wanted to actually provide value to the business and not necessarily getting hooked up on, spending weeks or months to set something up.
Right.
So cloud took this first step where it was like, you don't worry about infrastructure, right? The service is there, you click a button, you get it. You don't worry about scale, You just click a button, we scale it for you, we secure it, etc. But the next step of this was like, well, you still have a database there or databases there, or other things, sometimes just Bitbuckets really, where you store all this data. And as we have just so recently seen with the unfortunate security breaches over the last couple of weeks, it's like it's not just enough to get a database or something up and running, and it's like you don't worry about scale. It's about making sure it's always on the latest patches, making sure that this is secure, making sure that it always runs fast, etc. And with the autonomous database, we essentially now incorporate this all automatically, autonomously in the database. We have many smart features since a long time. And I always argue it goes back to the cost-based optimizer, right?
Exactly, I was about to say optimizer.
Yeah. When you type a SQL query today, you don't worry about anymore whether you have to get to an index or whatever, right? It's like the optimizer figures it out, and for 99.9999% of the time it gets it right and does a really good job there.
Right.
And that's exactly where we strive next. It's like, why do we have to occupy all our users out there with hideous tasks to some extent of patching and migrating, etc. Let's take this all away and enable our users to actually provide value to the business, provide value to the IT out there, right? So that you can now focus on what data do I store, how do I store it, whom do I give access to, right? How do I manage this? Data is stored for 30 plus years sometimes. Right? We have databases that go back since the 70s, data is stored in there, right? So there's a long journey, and you cannot just always focus on, now let's make sure we patch it every 3 months, and we are too busy patching the system to actually do something else, that the business actually would ask us to do.
Exactly. Well, good. So that's Sunday. And
that is Sunday.
And it makes sense. Autonomous database makes sense because we're so far ahead with what we're doing with our technology. So good. So next, let's talk about MLE.
MLE, so that will take us fast forward to yesterday, Tuesday.
Right.
Where we launched the public beta of the new Oracle Database Multilingual Engine.
Multi-Lingual Engine.
MLE. So our database can now speak many languages.
Okay.
What that means is, well, first and foremost, it's a beta.
Right.
It's on OTN to be downloaded. So if you just Google for Oracle Database Multilingual Engine, you will come to this beta website. On OTN, you can download the virtual box image, the Docker image.
Pretty big though. It's 12 gigs. So
it is pretty big because it just gives you everything that's there, right? So it's like just download and play. We don't want people to get stuck on testing new functionality with getting it installed or set up. And 12 gigs these days, when you stream a movie over Netflix and co. Anyway, so what does it mean multilingual, right? The new way of thinking that we have is, so we talked about autonomous databases and making it easier to manage data, but another side angle to this, or another angle to this is, well, how do we make it easier to use your data and process your data? And there's many different areas where we're advancing, whether it's on the analytics side of things in SQL, but another angle to this is, we said, well, you should be able to run any piece of code as closest to your data as possible. Okay. So this goes back to the thinking is nothing new. The thinking got revived, and when we talked about Hadoop clusters, it's like, don't bring the data to the processing, bring the processing to the data.
Right.
Kind of we had this before with stored procedures. People these days don't like stored procedures, but it was exactly the same thing. Don't bring the data from the database to your processing, but actually bring the processing to the data wherever it makes sense. And yet today we see a proliferation of many, many programming languages, good or bad. But the fact is, if you're a developer of programming language A, then you're a really good developer of programming language A. And if you're a developer of programming language B, then you're really good at that. And usually you do get people that write multiple programming languages just fine, and that's great. But there's also many, many people out there that stick to their programming language of choice. They like it, they used it for years and years. So we said, okay, we should be able to actually allow people to write a piece of code in their programming language of choice, and if they want so, if they think that it makes sense for the execution to run close to the data inside the database, then you can put it in there. And the first iteration of what you will see with the multilingual engine that we launched yesterday is essentially, you can think of it as JavaScript stored procedures. So I can now write JavaScript code to interact with my data and run this inside the Oracle database as a stored procedure. And it's either because you want to make sure that you don't pull the data all out to your client side or to your server, to your application server side, Node.js and put it back in. Or it could also just be that what we have seen is a lot of times code is repetitive. In a JavaScript landscape, it's the obvious one would be, for example, a credit card check that the number is valid, right? Or a date of birth, that it's not in the future, and so forth. Right. So you have this check on the browser side in JavaScript. You have to have the 16 digits of a credit card number, right? You have to have an expiration date that's in the future, and so forth. And then you would repeat this piece of code somewhere in the mid-tier when the data comes in. Well, I checked that this credit card is valid. And then you will potentially repeat this check yet again on the data layer, on the database, where you say, well, I only store valid credit card numbers, because as soon as I store garbage, you get garbage out. So now let's imagine you have this piece all written in JavaScript on the browser, and now you run this already today on Node.js and have the same piece of JavaScript written on Node.js on the back end. Well, what you can actually now do is you can stick the same piece of code into your database. And really the benefit here is that you essentially just maintain one piece of code across any layer of your processing of your system, from the presentation to the logic to the database layer. So we give people the choice. It doesn't mean rewrite everything into JavaScript and stick it into the database, of course not. But it should never ever be a hindrance any more than when somebody comes to us and say, hey, I want to write programming language A, aka JavaScript, that we say, oh yeah, you have to learn PL/SQL, for example. Right. No. I mean, if you do, and if you can write PL/SQL, that's great, and if you just want to stick to JavaScript, that's great as well.
Seems to me there might be a really cool driver that they're going to incorporate there so that you could use this in order to migrate legacy apps instead of having to rewrite them?
Yeah, so it's not so much of migrating the apps altogether, but it becomes really interesting when you think now, so when we stick with JavaScript, and just one more time, the engine is called Multi-Lingual, so the engine is capable of running essentially any programming language. But we are starting with JavaScript as a prototype as this beta is going ahead. But when you think about it, so now you have a Node.js application that uses an Oracle Node.js driver for the Oracle database, and now this driver or the database or both of them become intelligent enough to say, hey, you know what, this piece of code that you just executed would run so much faster if you would run it in the database, or hey, you know what, this piece of code that you just executed in the database would scale so much better if you run it on the mid-tier.
Oh, so it is more than just a gateway.
Oh, yes.
It's not just emulation.
There's a lot of possibilities. It's not emulation at all. Actually, we use a really cool technology underneath called the Graal just-in-time compiler, the Graal VM. So that's really cool. That allows you essentially to construct languages into bytecode or LLVM bitcode and leverage it on that. And then we also do optimization just in time, like we've done for a long, long time in the Java JVM.
We've been tinkering with Graal for a while.
Oh, yeah, certainly. And many teams are looking into this, and a lot of people are excited about it.
Good. Oh, that's really cool. Okay, so we have autonomous database.
Yep.
We have MLE.
Yep.
Which is very, very cool. What else? Anything?
Well, how confused are you by the new version numbers?
Oh. Well, I don't know, Gerald. Let's see. We're going from 12C to 18.
That's correct, yeah.
Well, I just think that we should just like bag the whole thing and go by star dates.
Yeah, that would be cool actually for the future, right? It's like at least, so not only are we taking a gigantic leap into the future by skipping essentially four numbers, for major release numbers, but actually, let's just go star dates.
Yeah, let's just like bag the whole thing.
It's like in 200 to 300 years, is actually we have no problem. We go like, nah.
Meh.
It's like, what are you talking about? You know, everybody knows start date.
You guys are funny. Well,
no, so what we've done there, just for the listeners to explain briefly, it's like for a long, long time, and actually not that long at always since Oracle existed, but I think it started with 7 or maybe started with 8, I'm not quite sure. We introduced this major release number, this minor release number, then actually the 0 in there was always the application or the application server, the Oracle,
right,
or the later on Fusion middleware release number, and then a patch set on top. So 12.2.01, major release 12, minor release 2, 0 because we are not middleware, we are database,
right,
and then 1 for the first patch set, for the first iteration. And we actually, you know, as we go into the 2020s kind of, let's say, in the future direction, we see that, you know, decisions that made a lot of sense in the past, you know, I think we did it with 8.1, I believe, maybe it was 9.0. It made a lot of sense back then, maybe it doesn't make so much sense now anymore. So the fundamental change that we are proposing is a change of the release model altogether. So the release model of the Oracle database always used to be 5 years long. You had a .1 release, minor release 1, and then you would have 2 to 3 years, I believe, and then you would have a .2 version, and then we would have another
5 years
5
long?
years. Yeah.
Wow.
That's
I had
exactly
no idea.
it, right? So obviously in today's world, or let's back up, in yesterday's world, in the late 90s and the early 2000s, 5 years was okay.
Yeah,
you know,
because you
things
wanted a
run
stable release. You didn't want to feel like you were ever on release 1. You always wanted to
yeah,
be,
but also things didn't move so fast anymore, right? Everybody wants to be on a stable release.
You didn't want to have to migrate stuff.
But we actually got into this as the world got moved faster along. We ended up with like, well, a lot of new features in the .1 release, and then the .2 release was always meant to be the stability release.
Yeah.
Not so many new features.
Yeah.
Well, you quickly end up in a time frame where you say, okay, you have 5 years. Whatever feature you put into the release today, you better be sure that in 5 years' time it's still relevant. And for a lot of features, we always hit the nail, and we were actually always very much ahead of the time, as we just proven yet again with autonomous. But what we said, well, actually, we should actually move from a 5-year release cycle to a yearly release cycle. So this is really what's happening, and therefore we said, well, now let's go ahead and actually change the release numbers to change the thinking of our customers and the people out there. And from now going forward, we only will have an Oracle 18, an Oracle 19, and Oracle 20. There may or may not be a C on it.
The year.
Based on the year that we release it. And in all of those years, you will get new features.
Okay.
Now, in the beginning, a lot of people were like, oh my God, now I get new features every year, not every 5 years. This is a major effort for me to keep up to date or to upgrade. And it's actually no, when you think about it, what we have done is, rather than cramping many features into 5 years, I mean, sometimes we have releases with over 500 features, so like 100 features per year.
Yeah.
Some of them bigger, some of them smaller.
Okay.
We would usually always see 300 features or so. Rather than cramping that all in one big shebang release, we can now say, hey, you know what? You only get like 50 new features in year 1, and maybe you get 10 new features in year 2 because the others are not done yet, and maybe you will get 100 or 70 features in 2020. So it actually gets more stable because we made the releases and the amount of what a single release contains smaller.
And when you don't have any features, you can just like change the UI from gray to red and then just like push it out, and it would be a new version.
That could be an option to just kind of lipstick it, but frankly, I tell you, so far there hasn't been a single year where we got bored.
Okay.
So, and for the next 5 to 10 years, what we have on our plans,
You're all
we
set.
won't get bored. Yeah.
All right, on. That's so cool. Well, thanks for coming by, Gerald.
Absolutely.
It was great catching up with you.
Yeah, certainly. Same here. Thanks for having me, Laura. I appreciate
All right,
it.
we'll be talking soon. We'll be seeing you on the road at Oracle Code.
Yes, absolutely. Do we have the cities announced?
Well, we don't have the cities
right?
announced. They will be
Yeah.
coming soon.
I
But
know.
congratulations
Well, I will
on
be
our
there.
first 21 cities. Well
Yeah,
done.
it was great here.
Good on you.
Yesterday as well, Oracle Code, and that was awesome.
right.
Thank you
Okay.
very much for having me, Laura.
All right, thanks, y'all.